Okay, right, well, thank you for sticking with it and waiting to hear about York. It's really nice to be here today and see all the lovely joint working that's going on in Scotland towards improving air quality. York's been involved with low emission strategies for a few years now. You may be aware that we were the first local authority, to my knowledge, to produce an overarching low emission strategy back in 2009. So what I want you to do today is take you on a bit of a journey as to how we got to that point and what's happened since we published our strategy in terms of actually getting things on the ground and moving forward with it. Okay, so York, it seems to have an awful lot in common with Perth. I've never been to Perth, but that presentation sounds awful like mine in the first few slides. It is a very beautiful historic city. It's a walled city, fairly compact, very famous for our Viking and Roman heritage. If you haven't been, I don't encourage you to come, but if you are a true Scotsman, don't come on a Sunday morning, because I'm led to believe that if you enter the city via Booth and Bow on a Sunday morning, it's quite in my right to shoot you with a bow and arrow. So there you go, you have been warned. Get on the park and ride bus, you'll be safe. Okay, right, so yeah, here's York. As I said, designed for Romans, doesn't really accommodate the traffic we have today. As you can see, we have quite a bit of congestion still in the city centre. Consequence, obviously, we have air quality management areas, much the same as most people involved in local authorities in this room, I would imagine. Our main air quality management area is up here in the city centre. That was declared way back. It's all the major routes into the city and the inner ring road. The city centre itself is actually pedestrianised. We've got a huge pedestrianised city centre, similar to the one that was shown in the previous slide. But that actually pushed traffic out onto the inner ring road, which then caused some of these problems here. And that's our biggest headache. We also have these two other ones, one down here on the southern entrance to the city at Fulford, and one around this little square here, which is Salisbury Terrace, which is very tight terrace housing through which our park and ride bus runs. And as you'll hear later, that might be part of the problem. The solution to our air quality problems, well, back in 2002, when we declared the first air quality management area, we weren't too worried. York's been well known for its work on modal shift. We're a leader on park and ride, we're a leader on cycling. It'll all be fine. Unfortunately, didn't quite go that way. What you're looking at here is annual average results for 40 diffusion tube sites across the city centre. So they're averaged across the 40 sites for the whole of the city centre. So back in 2002, we declared, we were up here, kind of like 45, 46. By the time we got our action plan written and started doing a few decent things, we were down here. And we thought, right, okay, we're doing all right. Year after, yep, it's going down again, great stuff. Year after, a bit of a blip. Well, it was quite a hot year, won't worry too much about it. Unfortunately, it tended to go up and up until we got to here, 2009. By which point, we were starting to get a bit worried, and our politicians were asking quite a few difficult questions. So AQAP1, first action plan, was all about modal shift. AQAP2 actually occurred about here when we republished a local transport plan, and we actually added a few more bits and pieces in that we couldn't quite afford to do when we were doing it here. So AQAP1 there, AQAP2 there, low emission strategy came in here. Before we did our low emission strategy, we felt it was really important to try and understand why we hadn't seen the air quality improvement we were expecting. Remembering here, we're going back in time, and we all know why the issue is now. First of all, diesel cars, massive increase in the uptake of diesel in York, and we had also done our own remote emissions testing, and this is several years ago, pre the VW issue, so it came as no surprise to us when that was published. Big issue with these things, unfortunately. York, yes, it was very commendable, all the work we did on modal shift, but unfortunately that increased the number of buses in the city massively. As part of our first air quality action plan, we had a 10-minute metro system introduced. We also had various park and rides introduced at various times, and we've now actually got, I think it's 6 altogether at the moment, so we've got a lot more buses in the city than we had before. And like any other city, we're keen to encourage development, but with that comes emission creep, and that is also responsible for some of our problems. So, Low Emission Strategy 2009, new air quality action plan. Now it says there September 2015 because it was due to go to members last month for stamping and it got pulled. It's going again at the end of this month, I am told. And I was at work very late on Monday night making all the amendments to hopefully get the rubber stamp on this month. So I'm going to talk now about two main areas, bus-based measures and planning. There's lots of other things we're doing, but there's not time to cover them all here. So moving first on to the low emission bus feasibility study work we did. What we wanted to do was understand what the impact of all these additional buses was. And to do that, we felt we needed to have much more information about where the buses were coming from, where they were travelling to, what type of buses they were, and which buses were coming in most frequently through the day, and what kind of age those buses were, etc. We teamed up with the Institute of Transport Studies at Leeds University and also Halcro, who work with the Council on Transport subjects. What they did was they built a very detailed paramix traffic model of the city centre and the radial routes leading onto it. They also linked that through to something called FEM, which is a very detailed emissions model. It's been developed by the Institute of Transport Studies and a university in Austria. And what that model includes is data on actual emissions measured from buses when they're braking, when they're accelerating. And they also took GIS sensors onto buses in York to measure the acceleration speed as they were coming out of the city on lots of various routes. So this is a very, very detailed model. It's not your sort of standard flow model. You know, it's not like there's X number of vehicles down the road and that produces X grams per kilometres, hence that. It's a much more detailed model than that helped us to look in much more detail at how the buses were impacted on air quality. So we looked at various scenarios for this little bus corridor idea we came up with. Because we also have sort of two major routes over the river, one here and one here and one here. Oh, so that's three actually, one here, one here, one here. But these two are the ones that carry the bus traffic. So nearly every bus that comes from York, goes through York, will go over these two bridges or one of those two bridges. So by making that a low emission bus corridor, effectively we could impact on most of the buses running around York. So what we did was we looked at what was happening if we turned them all Euro 3, what was happening if they were all Euro 4, and what was happening if they were Euro 5. We didn't do Euro 6, this is some time ago, and Euro 6 was a long way in the distance then. The other thing we did as well, just out of interest, was to have a fiddle around and see what would happen if we could turn the park and ride buses to electric. At this point, we weren't even sure that was a feasible option, but we thought we'll have a look and see what happens. And what we actually found, which was really interesting, was that by just changing the park and ride buses to electric, potentially that could have about the same impact as converting every single bus in York to a Euro 5. Interesting, because we have a lot more control over the park and ride buses in York, because we own the park and ride sites and we give out the contracts to run those sites. It also means you didn't have to upset lots of little bus operators who really only come in 1 or 2 times a day, and to be honest, their buses are not the ones causing the problem. So the next question was, well, can we run electric buses? Is that possible? Does that work? Now, luckily, we had started looking at this as well around the same time, and there was an electric bus feasibility study going on too. And out of that, there was a couple of 3 sort of main paragraphs that were really, really influential. The first one was that 80% of bus movements, these actual movements in the city, are made by only 49% of the total number of buses. And that is on 20 out of 65 scheduled routes. And we call these the frequent flyer services. And these are having a disproportionate impact on air quality. Not because they're old buses, most of them are actually pretty decent buses. York's got a really good bus fleet. We don't have many that are less than Euro 4, most are Euro 5. So what it was really, what came across, was it was the frequency of entry that was really the problem here. And because York is very flat, it has great topography, and most of these buses are on fairly short duty cycles, actually, when we did this feasibility work, it actually came back that yes, potentially we could run electric buses. So, a solution perhaps. We came up with this idea of a clean air zone. Now, this idea of a clean air zone was way before DEFRA's clean air zones. It's got nothing to do with DEFRA's clean air zones. Ours is very much based on frequency of entry. Ours is very much based on having everything as an ultra-low emission vehicle in terms of high frequency vehicles. And we are aiming by 2018 to have 80% of our bus movements undertaken by ultra-low emission vehicles. And we have done quite well already at getting this in place. We currently have 2 park and ride sites operating on full electric buses, which has happened over the last 2 years. And to be honest, I have been absolutely taken aback at how quickly this has happened. If you had told me 3 or 4 years ago we'd be on electric buses by now, I wouldn't have believed you. So it's been a really, really good piece of work. Left us with a slight problem though. What do we do about tour buses? I'm sure numerous cities in Edinburgh will have these things as well. Yankee old buses that go around belching out pollution all day. Members of the public hate them. They complain constantly to air quality officers about them. But they're very high frequency services. So if you're going to have a clean air zone, there's no way I was going to get away with saying, well, the tour buses are exempt, because the councils would have had a fit. So we had to come up with a solution for them. Now, they weren't going to invest in electric buses, that was for sure. So we managed to get some Cleaner Bus technology funding to try and convert them to electric. So taking the old bus, pulling its guts out and replacing it with lithium-ion battery technology. And we've managed to do this successfully. We've done it on this bus, and we've got 5 more coming along soon. So that puts us now in a really good position to move forward with the clean air zone because we've tackled one of the biggest headaches we had in relation to it. I'm now going to talk very quickly about our impact on development. So we've dealt with public transport to some extent, but as I said before, development is constantly happening in York and we're getting emissions creep. Like many authorities, we've had in place for a long time sort of local guidance when an air quality impact assessment's needed, how to improve your development by setting it back from the road, having non-opening windows, etc., etc. But we're getting increasingly frustrated by the fact these air quality impact assessments keep coming back saying there'll be a 0.002 microgram increase, therefore it's insignificant. Well, it might be insignificant to the person writing that report, but to me as an air quality officer in York, that is not insignificant, because all those 0.02s, 0.01s all add up to quite a lot. So we decided to try and take a different approach, and we've been working with some friends at Low Emission Partnership to use an emission damage cost approach. So the idea here is that instead of looking at concentration change, you look at emission impact of that development. So what's the actual amount of emission coming off it, and how can you reduce that emission impact? And actually put that down on a workbook and show it to me on a piece of paper. And then when you've done that, show me how you're going to mitigate that emission. So how much emission mitigation are you going to do? And when you've done that, how much is going to be left? And the process goes a little bit like this. You classify the development, sort of how big it is, where it is in terms of the air quality management area. And there's various ways of doing this. I'm not going to go into the detail now. You look at what the impacts of that are in terms of what the traffic will be from it. You take into account any travel planning measures, and then you decide what's left over. You then come up with a mitigation strategy, and you submit all that to me, and that tells me what my recommendations to the planners should be. So that's the approach you've been taking. The kind of mitigation we're after, for most sites, even little tiny ones, we will require some EV infrastructure. So even a single house, if it's got a garage, put a plug socket in the garage so somebody can have an electric car. It's as simple as that. If it's a bigger site like a supermarket or something, we've been going for about 2% of the parking places to be electric. We also want you to have a construction emission management plan to make sure you don't create a load of particles when you're building the damn thing. And what we also want to see on slightly bigger ones is some form of trip reduction. So we do want walking and cycling on every single development in York. That's a given. We expect that, nothing less. But we'd like to see a bit more innovation where we can see it. And then after you've done all that, you might provide electric minibus, for example, or something like that for your workers. If you can't do anything else on your site, then do something else off the site. So, for example, recently we had a new stadium application in York. And what we're going to do with that one is we are requiring some rapid charge infrastructure to help taxis that are serving that site in terms of bringing people to the conference centre. So that's the off-site mitigation. If you're doing all that, you're still going to have a major impact on air quality in our city, then we're going to be trying to look for some financial contribution towards that emission. Now, we haven't got this little bit completely sorted with planners yet. It is a bit of a difficult one, but we are making some progress, and I'm confident eventually we will get to the point where we are getting developers to fully compensate against their emissions. Just to mention in passing a few more things, the other stuff we've been up to, we have a very successful EcoStars scheme. We've got 50 members at the moment plus. The one there in the middle, the Electric Car Club, that is linked to our new council offices in City Centre. So we've basically almost removed most of the grey fleet movement. So that's people using their own cars from work. Effectively, there is no parking at work anymore. If you want to go out, you use the car club car. And then in the evenings, when we've all gone home, the members of the public use the car club as well. And that's been really successful. Obviously, sustainable travel is still very, very important, underpins everything we do. And I would completely support everything that's been said about walking and cycling. That has to be your number one step. So we still do a lot on sustainable travel. The taxi incentive, we're offering £3,000 to taxi drivers to convert to an electric or an electric hybrid or just a normal hybrid vehicle. And we have a pay-as-you-go EV charging network, which you can just turn up and use. No pre-booking, no card required. You can just turn up and use it with your mobile phone. We also do quite a lot of promotional work. I mean, obviously I'm here today to promote some of the work we're doing, but we've held electric vehicle events and things like that in the past. Is it working? This is EV charging sessions growth in York over the sort of last year or so. As you can see, it's been steadily growing. The blue is cars, the red is the buses, that's the electric buses coming online. And we got the latest report on Monday, and we've actually topped the 1,000 charging sessions a month. So hopefully that's an indication that we are having some impact on people's behaviour in terms of vehicle choice, and it will hopefully lead to some improvement in air quality. Further work, delivery of the CAS, further infrastructure expansion. We want to take our EV charging regional. Looking at an anti-idling strategy. I know there's a lot of that going on in Scotland, so we're looking up here to see what you guys are up to. We're still working on parking and taxes. We think there's much more can be done there. More education, local incentives for using ultra-low emission vehicles, trying to sort of give people a reward for doing so, and improving our monitoring capacity even further. We're working with the University of York to look at a new monitoring system. A few acknowledgements there. I must mention my colleagues, Andy Gill, Derek McCready and Mike Southcombe, who also work very hard on this area to get things moving. And I think I've mentioned most of the people in passing there. So if you want more information, please get in touch. Your Air there is our webpage. That has got lots of information about the work we do, the news. It's also got some really interesting stuff that we use in schools. For people who work with schools, you're more than welcome to have a look at that and use it. That's really me done. Okay, thank you very much.